Hi everybody, this is the first portion of the human versus machine project. We're going to go over just a couple of things, and basically this video is going to show you kind of how to get everything prepared, how to get your board prepared or your piece of cardboard prepared depending on what it is that you're going to be working on. Also how to use plastic so that way it can be covered properly. And then also we're going to talk about lining everything up so that that can be the right size. And then additionally, we're going to go over how to start to build the mass for this object, because we're going to be making a solid mass. That solid mass is going to be the mass that we're going to be sculpting with, doing additive and subtractive sculpture, or modeling. And then eventually we're going to let this piece dry out a little bit, and we'll go over this later when we're all the way done, and then we're going to be hollowing out the back side to make it a hollow object so that we can actually fire it. So today those are the things that we're going to be going over, or during this video I should say, those are the things we're going to be going over. There's going to be a separate video and separate demonstrations about how to do the modeling itself, but this is just going to cover those things that I mentioned, kind of setting up our board, getting it ready to go, also making some marks on that board so we know where we want to go and where our eyes and different portions of our face are going to end up, or be positioned on this object. And then we are going to talk about the plastic and how to put plastic on this object so that it's ready for us to be able to cover up and do things with. And then finally we're going to go over how to build the mass, how to build that initial mass that we're going to be sculpting from. So basically what that means with that mass is that we're going to be making the kind of chunkier portion of the object that we're then potentially going to be adding to or subtracting away from to build the different portions, or to model the different portions of the face. So let's get started with the board. So for this project, I'm actually going to be showing you guys how to do this by using a piece of cardboard. I've just cut this cardboard out, and the reason why I'm using cardboard is because I've got a lot of cardboard sitting around these days from all the different things that we're ordering on through all of our online services, so I'm using this. You can certainly use a piece of wood, and notice also that I'm working on a piece of wood, and then I have my table that's underneath here. Not that you need to do this. If you actually have an area outside that you can work, an outside table, maybe something that's glass or something like that, that would actually be a great place for you to be working because it's very easily cleaned. But if you're working like I am on my kind of dining room table here at home, then what you really want to do is you want to somehow protect that. And whatever way that means, you're protecting it. I picked up this board from Home Depot. It's a pretty simple piece. I think it costs like $6 or something like that, or maybe even less than that. It's just a piece of fiberboard. They come actually pre-cut in these 2 foot by 2 foot sections. And I just ended up buying this so that way I can have a workspace for me to be able to kind of get clay on things and move things around and actually work directly on them. You can actually see there's some marks that are on it already from some of the darker clay that I've been using. So that's certainly an issue. One thing that's very important for you guys to remember when you're working with this stuff is that clay is non-toxic, but clay, that's clay in the wet form. It's non-toxic. You can theoretically eat it. I don't recommend that you do that, but you could. Clay is actually is not good for you in the dry form. When it dries up and becomes a powder, that's when the clay can actually become not good for you, essentially. There's a condition that's known as silicosis. What that means is basically silica dust. There's silica inside of clay. It becomes airborne when it's dry. If you're using like a broom or something like that to sweep up, or a little hand broom, that's not a good idea. What I suggest you do is use a sponge. I have a really inexpensive sponge that I use. And then I also gave you kind of a small sponge within those loaner tools. And that's something that you can use as well. But if you need a larger sponge or a cloth or something like that, you can do that to clean up after yourself. But you want to make sure that not a lot of this stays around. Now, the thing about silicosis is you're not going to get it if you're working and doing, a couple of projects within ceramics this semester and using the clay. It's something that can develop over about 30 plus years of being around this stuff. So if you come back to school and end up taking classes within ceramics or within the sculpture studio, we try and keep that dust down to a minimum as well, using those same methods of cleaning up using wet sponges, wet mops. Not doing it dry so that it doesn't become airborne, because it's that airborne, those airborne particulates, the airborne silica that can cause something like that. So anyways, I've got this board to work on. Maybe you end up just putting some thin plastic sheeting or something like that down. I don't recommend using something like the dry cleaner plastic or anything really thin like that, because that can potentially get a rip or a hole in it or something, and then it can end up, causing some damage to your table. So I would suggest something kind of rigid like this object that I'm working on, or you can kind of improvise and find something. Maybe you're working on a large piece of cardboard. That totally works as well. Okay. So anyways, I've got this cardboard. I cut this cardboard relatively big. I had measured the height of my my face plate, if you will, the front portion of my head from my chin to the top of my head. Don't go chin to the middle of the forehead. That's not going to give you an accurate measurement. So what I did is I measured it from the bottom of my chin here to the top of my head. All right, pushing down on the hair. Okay, if you have hair, I don't, so I didn't need to do much pushing, but I did need to do a little bit of pushing down here because I have a beard. So you just want to kind of find out where that hard stuff is, where your chin is and where the top of your head is. Maybe you can have somebody help you out in measuring that as well. I've got a nice clearish kind of ruler that I use, and I just use this for a lot of different things, but any kind of ruler will work, or even a tape measure. Okay, and then you're probably going to want some sort of a flat edge. That flat edge doesn't need to be a ruler, it could be anything really. So what I've done is I've marked the top and the bottom of where my head is, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here onto this, and this is another reason why I like to use cardboard for this part, is because I can actually kind of get these marks on here really easily. So I'm going to do this and go all the way across, so I know where the top of my head is going to lie. And then I'm going to go down here to where the bottom would be, and notice I put 2 marks on each one, right? So I put a mark here. You might not be able to see them, but I put a mark here and a mark there. Let me darken them up. I think I did them with pencils, so they're not very visible. So maybe you can see them now. Okay, both those lines, because using both those lines is going to enable me to get a nice straight line, essentially, where it's going to happen. If I just put one line, I could end up putting my ruler kind of crooked on there and not getting a good measurement. All right, so there we go. Okay, then I've also made some marks in the middle as well. And one thing that I like to do with the ruler is that if you put that ruler in a certain spot where it kind of lines everything up, then when you want to make a mark, right, the halfway mark for me, mine was 10 inches. Okay, so what I can end up doing is I can come up here to the 5 mark, which in this case is the 6 mark, because I'm starting on the 1 over here, right? So there's my middle of that, and then we want to get the middle of this. So from 1 to 5, the middle of that is going to be 2.5, so I count 1, 2.5, and then I'm going to give a mark here on one side of the ruler and on the other side of the ruler in the same spot. So we do the same thing down here, because we kind of want all those measurements to be able to figure everything out. There may be a couple more measurements that we go through. Just make sure you take a look at that that demonstration, that video that talked about the proportions of the head or the face, and it talked about drawing the face, the front view of the face. It's going to be really helpful for you if you take a look at that. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to make these marks, all right, all the way across, so that way when I have my clay on this, I can actually see where each one of these things is going to line up. All right, So if you've watched that video about the proportions of the face, here is my top. I'm going to just mark that top. I can also come over here and kind of mark it on the side where it's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be covered up by anything once I get the clay in there, right? So I could put like something like top of head. All right, and then remember from that video, from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin, halfway is where our eyes are going to line up. I know it sounds weird, but trust me, it's going to look normal if we do that, okay? If we don't end up doing that, the head is going to look a little bit different, okay? It's going to look a little bit, kind of proportions are going to be off, okay? And then if you remember from this one that's halfway in between the top of the head and the eyes, that's going to be our hairline. So you can mark those sorts of things, okay? This is that. Then down here is going to be the bottom of the nose. This is going to be the bottom of the chin. And then in order to find out where that, where the mouth is going to line up, that's going to be halfway between here. So just remember all those things, make the marks that you need to make, and kind of do them at this point in time, and get those marks to come all the way over here to the side, right? And we can mark this, eyes, right? Bottom of chin, okay? So all those sorts of things we can mark, and we can get everything ready for us, okay? And then when we've got the things marked that we want to have marked, okay, then what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up using plastic. And when we use plastic, we want to make sure that that plastic is underneath, okay? There's a couple of things that we can do. You know, one thing I can do with this if I wanted to, and if I'm done making all the marks that I want to, I'm going to come in and do some extra ones a little bit later to show some different spots. One of the things I could do is I could get like packaging tape that you use to close a box, and I could just cover all of this with packaging tape. And if I do that, it makes this surface non-porous, and that's what we want to do, because when we're working with these, when we're working with clay, we don't want it to dry out on us. If I take clay and put the bare clay directly on a board, or if I put the bare clay directly onto the cardboard, moisture is going to draw through that, and it's going to dry out the clay rather quickly without you even knowing that it's happening. You could step away from it for a day or two and then come back to it, and it might be too hard for you to work with. So the other thing we could do if we don't use the packaging tape is we could take something like dry cleaner plastic like this, which is one of my kind of favorite ways to wrap things. You can also use something like a a thin garbage bag. But one of the things I like about dry cleaner plastic, and if you have a dry cleaner in your neighborhood, just go by there and say, hey, can I get a piece of dry cleaner plastic, or a couple pieces? If you ask for a couple of them, most likely they're just going to give them to you. But also what I like about it is that it's clear. So now I can actually look through that and I can see those marks that I've made. And so when we start building and putting our mass of clay down here, this is where we're going to put it. The other thing that you might want to do, right, is you might want to take a look at the shape of your head and maybe draw out the shape of the head here in a general fashion. We might be changing that a little bit, okay, as we're going through, depending on what it is that we're going to add to it in terms of the machine portion, or the man-made or human-made objects, okay, the machine parts. And so that's maybe what we end up, kind of figuring out. But then we want to make sure too that this board down below is going to be able to accommodate all those things. We don't want anything hanging off of the board and coming over to this edge when we're working on this board. The reason why we do this too, ladies and gentlemen, is because what I can do then is take this at the end of the time frame that I'm working on it, and you'll see me do this later. I can take this and wrap it all the way up. And wrap up that piece that I'm working on, and I don't need to tape it or anything. I can just kind of set something on top of it, maybe something that has a teeny tiny amount of weight, right? Just something that's going to enable, not something super heavy, because then it's going to destroy the integrity of the modeled, sculpted form that we have underneath. So, I want to just put something over there so this can't blow open, okay? If a stiff wind or something comes by. So something kind of not too heavy, but also something not very light. The other thing, if you have it large enough, is you can actually tuck things underneath. Okay, and then what we're able to do with this is we're able to kind of take this and move it around and place it in different spots at our house while we're working on stuff. If we're working on a different project, or if we're clearing the space so that way somebody else can use it. Like in my case, this is my dining room table. So you know, I may want to clear this whole space off, and now I have the ability to move those things. So that's kind of how we're going to begin to set up for this human versus machine project.